I want you to close your eyes and step into a fateful morning. It is November 18th, 1999, and the campus of Texas A&M wakes to a nightmare. Imagine the crisp autumn air, the distant hum of early activity, and then a deafening collapse. A massive stack of logs, painstakingly built over weeks, comes crashing down without warning. In that instant, lives are trapped beneath the rubble, and a cherished tradition turns into a catastrophe. This is not just a story about wood and fire. It's a raw, unfiltered account of ambition, negligence, and tragic miscalculation that would forever stain the Aggie legacy. Let me take you back over a century to November 18, 1907. Back then, Texas A&M students, riding the high of a football victory, spontaneously set a modest pile of firewood ablaze. That impromptu celebration was the seed of what would evolve into the legendary Aggie Bonfire, a tradition that, for generations, symbolized school spirit, unity, and the burning passion of a community. Over the years, the bonfire transformed. What began as a small, unofficial fire built from wood and scrap became a meticulously organized event. By the 1930s, the college took over the planning, and soon every year the bonfire evolved into a towering structure. Students sourced every log themselves, sometimes leading to mischief and theft, as the hunt for the perfect firewood became part of the lore. From simple stacks to towering, multi-tiered infernos, each year the bonfire grew in height and ambition, a physical manifestation of Aggie pride. As decades passed, the bonfire's design became a balancing act between tradition and structural integrity. In the 1940s, a central pole emerged as the backbone of the structure, with logs arranged diagonally against it. This design, while innovative, imposed limits. The final height was dictated by the longest log available. But the Aggie spirit is anything but limited. In the 1960s, students ingeniously spliced together multiple central poles and began stacking logs in ever more daring configurations, reaching impressive heights. By 1969, one bonfire soared to 109 feet, an awe-inspiring sight for thousands of spectators. However, pushing the limits came at a cost. The more layers and logs that were piled, the higher the center of gravity soared. This wasn't merely a question of aesthetics, it was a matter of physics. When you stack wood, especially in such grand quantities, the forces acting on the structure multiply. Over time, the students, organized into committees known as the Red Pots, would develop the plans almost entirely by tradition and amateur sketches. No engineering blueprints, just decades of passed-down wisdom and sometimes dangerous guesswork. Fast forward to the late 1990s. By early October each year, the process would begin in earnest. Students, armed with axes and saws, would head out to cut the logs by hand, a task that could take weeks. The ground was prepared, lime was spread, and the soil compacted. Over 4 weeks, the wood was harvested. Then, a dedicated 3-week phase ensued to build the stack. Logs were tied to the central pole with heavy-duty wires, and the structure was reinforced by 4 guy ropes attached to perimeter poles. Every year, as the bonfire grew closer to its scheduled burn, excitement mingled with tension. The final stage, known as the push, stretched over 10 grueling days. Shifts of students worked around the clock to assemble the upper tiers, each additional level adding extra weight, height, and inherent risk. Finally, on the day of the burn, the colossal structure would be doused in fuel, ready to ignite in a spectacle that drew between 30,000 and 70,000 spectators. It was a symbol of unity, a celebration of victory, and a beacon of tradition. Now, let's return to that fateful morning of November 18th, 1999. Picture this. Around 2 a.m., the construction of the bonfire was progressing on schedule at the Texas A&M campus. At this point, nearly 5,000 logs had been stacked, with plans for another 2,000 to complete the structure up to its 4th level, reaching an approximate height of 40 feet. Workers were busy, the atmosphere charged with anticipation, as the bonfire was not merely a fire, it was an event, a rite of passage. Then, in the early hours before dawn, a sudden ominous sound shattered the silence. At around 2:43 a.m., a 911 call reported that the massive log pile had begun to creak and pop. Moments later, the unthinkable happened. The stack started to collapse. I want you to feel that moment of suspended terror when the ground trembled and the carefully constructed tower of logs buckled under its own weight. Within minutes, the entire section of the bonfire crumbled, sending a cascade of heavy logs crashing down. As the collapse unfolded, chaos erupted on campus. Emergency responders rushed to the scene. I ask you to imagine the frantic scene. Amidst the darkness, with only the weak light of emergency vehicles piercing the night, rescuers scrambled to save lives. The collapse created a dangerous debris field where logs tumbled like dominoes. Workers on top of the structure were caught completely off guard. Within minutes, several people found themselves trapped under the weight of the fallen wood. Rescue operations began immediately. First responders, along with countless students volunteering to help, worked tirelessly through the night, carefully removing logs by hand to minimize further collapse. Every heavy log that was lifted revealed another trapped soul, another cry for help. The initial report confirmed that at least 15 people had died in the immediate aftermath, with the death toll rising as more bodies were recovered in the hours that followed. By the early morning, it was evident that this disaster had taken a terrible toll. In the hours and days after the collapse, the campus and the nation were engulfed in grief and outrage. I want you to feel the collective shock of a community that had always celebrated the bonfire as a symbol of pride and unity, only to see it transform into a scene of devastation. The emergency crews worked through the night, and by the time the final log was removed, nearly 24 hours after the collapse, the true magnitude of the tragedy became painfully clear. Not only were lives lost, but the disaster also exposed deep-rooted issues within the tradition itself. Investigations later revealed a litany of structural failures. Logs were not stacked at the correct angles, wires meant to hold the structure together were overloaded, and crucial design flaws had been ignored for years. A combination of overambitious construction and lax oversight had set the stage for disaster. The university faced enormous expenses in the aftermath. Over $300,000 in disaster-related costs, covering everything from funerals to transporting injured students for medical care. Lawsuits and insurance claims followed, as families demanded accountability for the preventable loss of life. What had once been a proud tradition now stood as a grim reminder of the dangers of unchecked ambition and negligence. Now, let's dig into the investigation that followed. The president of Texas A&M commissioned a 5-person panel to conduct a thorough inquiry into the collapse. This panel delved into decades of tradition, scrutinizing everything from construction techniques to the management of student teams known as the Red Pots. These were the students responsible for planning and building the bonfire, and their methods, passed down verbally and through rough sketches, were now under the microscope. Thousands of documents, photographs, and witness testimonies were reviewed. The investigation found that the bonfire stack was plagued by structural deficiencies. For example, the first stack was built perpendicular to a slight slope on the polo grounds, while subsequent stacks were not aligned properly with the forces of gravity. This misalignment, compounded by an overabundance of vertically stacked logs rather than diagonally arranged ones, created what experts call wedging, a dangerous condition where upper levels force their weight into lower levels, undermining the entire structure. Furthermore, the quality of the timber had deteriorated over the years. In 1999, the logs used were less uniform and straighter than in previous years, causing larger gaps and increasing the strain on the supporting wires. When those wires finally broke under the relentless pressure, the upper stacks pushed the lower ones outward, triggering a catastrophic domino effect. The fallout from the 1999 Aggie Bonfire collapse forced Texas A&M and its community to confront difficult truths. The disaster not only cost lives, but also marked the end of an era. By 2002, rising insurance costs and public outcry led to the cancellation of the official bonfire tradition. In its place, a scaled-down version, often organized off-campus, emerged, an attempt to preserve a cherished ritual while acknowledging the inherent risks. In the years since, the Aggie Bonfire has become a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of what happens when tradition, ambition, and negligence collide. It is a legacy that calls for constant vigilance, rigorous oversight, and a commitment to safety that must never be compromised, no matter how beloved the tradition may be. I speak to you now with the weight of history in my voice. The 1999 Aggie Bonfire collapse is not merely a tragic event in Texas A&M's storied past. It is a lesson carved in wood and sorrow. Every time you witness a tradition celebrated with such passion, remember that behind the spectacle lies the potential for disaster if we ignore the warning signs of ambition run amok. I want you to carry this story with you. Let it remind you of the human cost when safety is sacrificed for grandeur, and let it serve as a call for accountability. The memories of those lost under that collapsing pile of logs should not fade into oblivion. They demand that we learn, adapt, and ensure that no other community endures such heartbreak. As we close this chapter on the Aggie Bonfire collapse, I urge you to reflect on what it means to celebrate tradition responsibly. Honor the memory of the victims by holding ourselves and those in charge accountable. May the echoes of that tragic morning guide us toward a future where ambition is tempered by care and where every flame that burns is built on a foundation of safety. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of the most painful chapters in Texas A&M history. Let this story be a beacon of caution and a reminder that true tradition must never come at the cost of human life. Stay vigilant, stay compassionate, and never forget the lessons carved into the ashes of that fateful night.